We welcome you back to the Big Bid Theory. Hope you and yours are enjoying the rise in temperatures. If you follow our Twitter, well, you know things are heating up, and I mean smoking here at the Big Show. You know what I mean. I'm Bill Culhane, your host, flying solo this episode. If you tuned into the last show, you know we respect and appreciate our lab professionals, saving lives every day. Well, they're wrapping up Lab Professionals Week as we record this episode, so kudos yet again to those fine folks. I'm coming to you from our studios in person, for real, in the flesh. However, our guest in this episode is a guy who knows all about virtual reality. As a matter of fact, he'll even look into the future for VR a little bit later in the show. And stop the presses. Jim Ward, the father of crazy bids, makes a triumphant return to the Big Show, and we'll hear Jim's latest crazy bid you can win. In all seriousness, we've read your emails and agree it's full of excellent that Jim is back. I said it. Azs Balabanian, the creative director at UploadVR in San Fran, joins us. Of note, and Oz will give more details later, Oz is the host of the ResearchVR Cast podcast, understanding how the VR industry is blossoming and many, including government agencies, are interested. We invited Oz to fill us in on what's going on.
Thanks for joining us, Oz. And in the interest of time, let's go ahead and dive right in. We'll chat about UploadVR and your podcast in a moment. But first, everybody has a backstory. What were the circumstances which ended up with you becoming involved in the world of virtual reality?
Well, thanks for having me first. I guess the way I found myself in this crazy world of virtual reality was a few years back. I had tried VR at a local meetup called SVVR, and it was just a free meetup you can go to, try it out, and at the time it was very early on, and I thought it was cool. Didn't really see myself devoting my entire career to it, but the transition really happened, or like kind of my eyes were opened when I was in college. And I was studying cognitive sciences, and so that had a lot to do with neuroscience and computer science. And in one class that was called Perceptions by Dr. Nicholas Davidenko, he was talking about how all your perceptions work, your visual perception, your auditory perception, and you really understood the extent of which those perceptions go. And in there, he talked about virtual reality and how you could use virtual reality to test these, perceptions, tests, and really push your human body to its limit. And so to me, that was really interesting. And I was really getting into like UX design, into understanding interaction design. Virtual reality was very new, and I really saw the big scientific advantages that it gave to researchers. And so that was my initial introduction, and I did research using virtual reality in a cognitive science lab with this professor for about a year and a half. And so that really opened my eyes as to, how you use VR as a tool rather than, a gaming device and whatnot. And from there, I got really interested in understanding the science of virtual reality and realized that not many people knew about it. And so I started hosting a podcast called the ResearchVR podcast, where it's all about covering the science of virtual reality, understanding how it all works and why it all matters.
Now, Oz, as I peruse UploadVR, it appears to literally be a one-stop destination for pretty much everything conceivable pertaining to VR. News, reviews, there's even a job board. I could go on and on. For our listeners, what exactly is UploadVR?
It started as a news site and a meetup organization, and so it really was all about, understanding what virtual reality was and how it related to the different industries. So UploadVR, obviously, as it started as a news site, it grew, and last year we opened up a co-working space in San Francisco, and this year we just opened up a new one in Los Angeles. And so it's a very specialized space for virtual reality and augmented reality companies. We report on everything virtual reality related on a news site, and we realize that there's a big potential for these companies to actually be sitting next to each other, having offices next to each other, and actually working together. And that's what we've noticed, is that these companies really end up collaborating a ton, because it's so early on right now that you really do need the help of everyone else to build whatever you're trying to build. And for companies that aren't, 50, 60-person companies, having another couple of co-founders that, sit by you and are just as passionate as you about their product, there's always a lot of potential for collaboration. And so that's the co-working side. We're also pretty focused on the education of teaching software developers how to think in 3D, how to build in Unity. And so there's a lot of new, very specific skill sets that people don't have to start building things in VR, and we're providing those as well. And so we really try to do everything there is that can be done with VR, from reporting it to educating to providing workspaces. And it's been pretty great so far.
You made a key observation, and that is really in the scheme of things, VR is relatively new. That being said, I'm confident that a majority of our listeners have an idea on what is virtual reality. But in your opinion, Oz, and I know there are a lot of moving parts in the industry, but in your opinion, what are one or two uses of VR which are most important, to your average John or Joan Q public person?
Well, let's just say, obviously, this is first generation hardware. There's things that aren't as, as comfortable as you'd want it to be, and they will be, obviously, in wide generation 2 and whatnot. But for the average Joe, I'd say one of the biggest and most coolest things you can do in virtual reality is the collaboration aspect of it. And so it's not the same as Skype or even a phone call or, sharing your screen to someone. When you're actually sitting next to a person also in VR, you get to see their head and their hands of their avatar moving exactly the same as how they would. So it essentially literally translates their body language into their avatar. And what that does is, if you know something about communication, that 60% of what's being said isn't actually through the words, but through the body itself. And so if, the potential for communication, for collaboration between coworkers, between lovers even, I think it is something really interesting. And we're starting to see a lot of people diving into that, both on the enterprise side as well as just social, multiplayer experiences that people can hang out in and do things. And so that was, I think, my initial pull into VR. Is I realized how impactful it was to stand in front of someone else. And I say that in the most literal terms. You're standing in front of someone else in VR or other people, and you feel their presence because they move how people move. And it's also funny because short people or, kids in VR actually end up looking short in VR. And so you look down and you're like, that's a person that who they are. And there's even cases of spouses looking at videos of their spouse in VR and being able to pick them out of a group, being like, yeah, that one moves like my husband, they know who they are. So that's one big one. Obviously, gamers are getting pretty excited by being immersed into their games even more. Filmmakers and the music industry is really interested in using this new medium to tell stories, to immerse people into music and themselves, and incorporating crazy synesthesia elements and interactivity with music itself. This is really blowing open a lot of new doors for human-computer interaction, and so we're just at the cusp of it now, and there's a lot of experimentation happening, and the overall excitement between the developers and people that want to build this is incredibly high. Nobody's ever really seen this much excitement from developers before. So that just means we're going to get a lot of really cool things coming down the line.
Speaking also of cool things coming down the road and opening new doors, about 6 months ago, I led a team that reported on public sector use of VR, and I'm going to include healthcare in there. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, from January 2014 to October of 2016, just that time period, there were just shy of 3,000 requests for VR and simulation type solutions. So government type agencies are helping grow the industry. But is there anything you're seeing right now, any factors that may be preventing the VR industry from thriving even more? Are there any bumps in the road right now?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, with such a small and new industry, and with a lot of hype around it, you'll see a lot of pushback and obstacles that it kind of has to overcome. I'd say VR is definitely has a pretty high barrier to overcome. Being on a computational level, it requires a ton of resources from the computer or whatever it's rendering from. And so you can't, you need, if you're going to run a high-end VR rig like a Oculus Rift or HTC Vive, you need a pretty good computer. So that right now requires some initial capital that you need to invest. But these things are definitely being overcome very, very quickly. We're starting to get very good at rendering these things efficiently with less heat and just on your mobile phones. And so you don't need a supercomputer to do it. I'll say though, I mean, on the private side, the training is, even though it might require some capital initially, but the overall benefits that it provides for training, and what I mean by training is skills that require muscle memory or require, repetitive tasks with your hands or your heads, and it's really hard to just read, what those tasks are. It's actually very good to practice them in VR, whether it's surgery or whether it's being in an international space station and flipping switches and knowing spatially where all these switches are around you. VR is really starting to be used as a big, big training tool, and I can't, overstate that enough. I think that's going to be probably the number one use cases that enterprises are starting to use now, and it's really fascinating to see how you can train people before they even go out in the field and have like incredibly high percentage rates for their first time doing something just because they train themselves in VR.
Just looking at some of the information I have here, just some recent requests, and I kind of touched on it a moment ago what the public sector is doing, but there's a request out of Mississippi for a virtual reality video system. There's a request for an ambulance simulator, firearms training simulator, VR headset, airborne technique simulator. So, yeah, there are a number of uses out there that, everybody's getting involved in. So it's exciting. Yeah. I guess is what we'll say in summary. But now, Oz, is the pressure time of our visit. It's time for you to pull out your crystal ball, and you and I have established, and everybody knows, that VR is a baby. In the timeline of the existence of mankind, VR is new. Where do you suspect that VR is going to be 5 to 10 years down the road?
5 to 10 years down the road, I think it'll still be around. But overall, if we're looking at it from a consumer perspective, it's going to be I'd say augmented reality is going to be a little bit more appealing for people because it's less immersive, and that's probably a good thing because you're not blocking out your entire vision and replacing it with a virtual world. Augmented reality will be a pair of glasses that you'll put on that they're just see-through glasses, and then suddenly there will be virtual elements inside of your world. So whether it's going to be a Pokemon walking out of a bush, or the floor itself will be lava, things like that will augment your experience through life. I think that has a lot more potential. But virtual reality isn't going to go away because immersion is a good tool to have, and I really suspect on the enterprise side that's really where a lot of the money is going to be, and it might even mirror kind of how the drone industry has grown, where I think it's really being pushed by enterprise first into having a lot more advancements and developments there, and actually making money on the enterprise side, and a lot of that technology kind of trickling down into the consumer market, and for the lesser, more fun-oriented devices. I really see that taking a lot of shape, and so I don't think this idea of having spatial programs and spatial OSs are going to go away because it's way too compelling. We're very used to using phones and computers and laptops, but those screens are very limited in how much information they can show you and how they can show you and how you can interact with them. And so I think from a UX perspective and an interaction design perspective, VR and AR are really bringing in a new age of how you use apps and how you interact with virtual, programs. And so intersecting that with AI, then you have something crazy, really cool. And I think that's really where things are going to go. I think for AI, the best way of interacting with an AI is going to be through either VR or AR, using voice commands, using hand commands, and even using eye-tracked commands. So, your eyes are going to be able to do things that your hands can't do or your voice can't do.
Oz, I want to thank you again on behalf of our audience so much. We appreciate you sharing your insights. How can our audience, first of all, find UploadVR? How can they find your podcast? If anybody wants to follow or contact you, what can they do to get all that done?
UploadVR, you can find, if you want to catch up on news and stuff, UploadVR.com. We have a ton of articles a day. We have a big YouTube presence as well, so we do a lot of really cool in-depth videos on how things work, covering games and the tech and everything around that. For kind of smaller updates, obviously we have Facebook, Twitter, and all that. For me specifically, I post a lot about, I'm a mixed reality filmmaker and a live stream producer as well, so I post a lot about the advancements on those on my Twitter. It's at AzadUX. The podcast is ResearchVR podcast, and so if you Google that, or we have a Twitter account as well, at ResearchVR Cast. And so we take questions on all things, related to science and virtual reality.
All right, well, Oz, again, thank you very much, and all the best to you and all the folks there at UploadVR.
Thank you for having me.
Yet again, thanks to Oz. We'll have, by the way, just make note of this, we'll have Oz's Twitter handle and podcast in the description of the podcast. And as he mentioned, you can also go to uploadvr.com. Now it's that time, and I'll be honest with you, I've sat around, I've pondered, I've considered, deliberated on the various clever, funny, even serious ways I could intro Jim Ward's return to the Crazy Bids microphone. And then the light bulb came on, and I realized all it takes is literally this. Jim Ward, Crazy Bids.
All aboard! It's Crazy Bids. Good gosh. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is Jim Ward, the triumphant returning keeper of the vault.
Oh, crazy bids that you can win.
For the Big Bid Theory. I want to say hello, how you been? It's been a while. Hope things are good. How are the kids? Great. Enough witty banter. So this Crazy Bid is brought to you from the city of Evanston, Illinois, Greater Chicagoland, also known as my adult home. And it is for, the title of the bid is Public Art Light Sculpture. It is due on May 16th. As some of you may recall, I dabble in the dark art of light painting and have for a few years now. I'm really good. I'm extremely adept at getting exactly what I want out of the light, which is very hard. Some of my work has now been internationally acclaimed. I'm proud of it. So this is actually not necessarily a crazy bid that you can win as much as a crazy bid that Jim can win. But, you can still bid on it. Just bid it with that in mind, so at your own discretion. We have seen many cities and municipalities issuing RFPs for very similar bids like this that are using light painting and light sculpture as a means of landscape architecture. Instead of the landscape actually contorting the topography to your liking, we're able to do it simply with light. We can create depth, we can create movement, we can create anything really that you want. The reasons that cities are going to this is, number one, aesthetically, it's just very pleasing to the eye. It's an attractive thing. I always wonder whenever I see a store or something advertising using light, it catches my attention, and I just wonder why more people don't do that, because, and the second reason, it's the cost. It's very minimal. Lights these days use very, very little electricity. There's no cost for maintenance, so if you were to do landscape architecture at the same intersection in Evanston, it would require a team to constantly upgrade and maintain the landscape architecture or the landscape project. Many cities are going to this light landscape versus landscape architecture for public works and public spaces. The reasons are multifaceted. For one thing, there's the beauty of it. Aesthetically, it's very pleasing to the eye. It's extremely inexpensive. Lights are very, very cheap these days to run. Their cost also, there's no maintenance. So if someone did the traditional what I think of as landscape architecture, like land art, that requires so much maintenance. It's crazy. Another neat thing about this is if you want to change the way it looks daily even, you can do so with light. You could not do so with the traditional methods. And last but not least, by any means, is a safety issue. And I don't mean this tongue-in-cheek because we're talking about Chicago and safety, which have not been used in the same sentence in quite some time. But as far as like this particular spot in Evanston's not exactly gangster haven, as many of you know, but it does bring light to some darker areas near some interstates and things like that, where the less desirables hang out, otherwise known as my friends. What this bid calls for exactly. Now, there were a couple questions. They did not specify if for any reason I have to go south of the loop, whether I get combat pay. I was kind of curious about that because I would kind of want it. Combat pay in Evanston is extremely unlikely, so I'm not too worried about that. One other thing, and this is just the city of Evanston not understanding what exactly they're getting in the package known as me, but I need total artistic license because making my vision and intent a reality is a process not for the weak of heart, not for the faint of heart, not for the weak stomach. Did I just mix those up? You get the gist of it. Chicagoland, just be prepared. So this bid ends on May 16th. I'll commence work probably 2 weeks thereafter. How long it will take me, no one knows. No one knows, because when I get in the zone, I am focused until greatness is achieved. But rest assured, Chicagoland, Evanston, that greatness will be achieved. This summer, the lights be tripping in Evanston. So check it out. Check it out. And sadly, that concludes this second inaugural episode of Crazy Bids That You Can Win. My name is, once again, the Jim Ward, and I want to thank the TBBT crew. The Big Bid Theory is something that, it's a juggernaut. It's a juggernaut which I'm glad to be attached to just be along for the ride. So on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to the TBBT crew. And Bill, thank you very much for your time and listening. You were paying attention, right? You were, right? Okay. Until next time, keep looking up, kids, because that's where it all is, or something to that effect.
Crazy bits. Crazy bits. Crazy bids!
Take it away, guys.
Thanks a bunch, Jim. Appreciate that, and can't wait to have you on, of course, the next episode in the entire season. You, my dear audience, will have your Jim Ward Crazy Bids all season here in Season 3. Can't wait to hear what Jim has for us in store in the next episode. Thank you again to Azs Balabanian from UploadVR. Appreciate him coming by the show. It didn't take long. We're back in the charts. We want to thank everybody for downloading, sharing, and following the Big Bid Theory. Remember, you can email me at bculhane@bidprime.com. Jim is jward@bidprime.com. Questions on government bids, including virtual reality requests, go to bidprime.com or call our Austin offices. The number's 888-808-5356. Our Twitter handle is @TheBigBidTheory. Thanks for following us, liking, and retweeting. My Twitter is contract_hunter. JW is Jim Ward, the number 6. Go to our Facebook to see Jim's Smoking Hot video, by the way. You'll love it. If you haven't already seen it, you've got to go check it out. Until the next show, for our staff, Kevin is always in a virtual world, and Lauren, bless her heart, sobbing tears of joy that JW is back. I think those are tears of joy. Until next time, go Gunners, Barracudas, Tigers, Bobcats, and Cubs, and we wish you all the best in growing your business.
We're having so much fun.